reasons and rationales for that. Some many people say, oh, we should just decolonize evaluation and this how to do it 1, 2, 3, 4, and they ignore that this has a lot of history about who writes for us. Do we read as evaluators from the global south or global north? Are we always reading to the same guy and referencing the same guy, looking up to this person or that, and not looking at the amazing wisdom around us, and working with fellow evaluators from different areas, global south or north, but also valuing the knowledge of people from different perspectives? Or we have this, what is called in some field, the wide gaze, they call it. Basically, that you're always thinking about specific segments of the international community in your mind in everything you do. So there's so much to this.
Welcome to the Rethink Social Change podcast, where we talk about what truly moves the needle for equitable and inclusive societal progress. I'm your host, Ratiba Sharif. I've designed, learned from, and evaluated social change for 20 years on 4 continents. I share my own insights here, but mostly amplify the voices of global change makers. I randomly draw cards from the Rethink Social Change deck to spark and guide unscripted conversations with them that explore what works, what doesn't, and why. Join us for real talk and lessons you can apply to create truly transformative social initiatives. I'm happy to chat today with Khalil Bitar, someone who's dedicated over 15 years to making evaluation more meaningful and equitable. Khalil is head of learning, monitoring, and evaluation at the WIS Academy for Nature at the University of Bern, but his influence in the field goes well beyond his day job. He's been deeply involved in initiatives that rethink how we approach evaluation. From founding the Palestinian Evaluation to co-founding global networks like Eval Youth and Eval for Action, his work focuses on issues like equity, social justice, and even decolonizing how evaluation is done that challenges the status quo and opens up new possibilities for change. Khalil also brings a strong academic background to his work, with advanced studies in development evaluation and a doctoral focus on equity and social justice. Whether he's teaching, publishing, or building networks, his approach always emphasizes inclusion and collaboration. In this conversation, I hope to learn more about Khalil's journey, the lessons he's learned, and how his work connects to creating systems that better serve the evaluation community. Let's bring him in. Hi, Khalil Bitar. Thanks so much for joining me.
Hello, Ratiba. It's very nice to meet you.
I've been after you for a while, right? But you are super busy, so I'm glad that we're finally making it. So, Khalil, you know the drill. Where I have cards, I'll probably get some cards out, draw some cards, and see where they will take our conversation. But before that, Khalil, while I shuffle the cards and get them out, I wanted you to tell me a little bit about. So you're based in a university, you're an academic. I wanted to know, the first thing is how is evaluation perceived from an academic perspective? Is it just academic research, or is it very much linked to practice, and in it, what way, and how does it inform practice?
Sure.
So
Yeah.
go ahead.
Currently, I work at the WIS Academy for Nature at the University of Bern. It is an institute that is affiliated with the University of Bern, but my role is the learning, monitor, and evaluation lead. So not directly an academic. I do teach in evaluation in other places as well, but this is actually a practitioner job that I have here.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I also did my research in evaluation. And, in our evaluation field or discipline, there's a lot of discussion right now. Even you can see it from a lot of the research papers, some of the books that, distinguish evaluation from research.
Mm.
And for me, I really believe that evaluation is a distinct discipline from research completely, in the sense that evaluation is the daily function we do to evaluate things, to see what is the merit and value in things. Where research, it's very important, but also has different functions.
Mm-hmm.
Where evaluation is more about determination of the value and merit and significance and so on. And yeah, this is what I experienced as well. Of course, people don't understand very much sometimes what the difference between evaluation and research and different so applied research, but that's also something on evaluation field. It's a new field. It's a 50 plus years field or so, and it's not always very clear. So it's our role as evaluators to explain that as well.
And it's an adapting field, right? It adapts to the way we do business, the world around us, new technology. So it's a very adaptable field, but I don't know if it's nimble enough given now the speed of change and the speed at which we need data. So I don't know if evaluation theory does evolve a lot. I've heard, I haven't been to any conferences recently, but there have been a few in Europe and in the US quite recently in the last months. And I think this has been discussed: is how do we make evaluation more anchored in the reality of
Yeah,
the changing world. Yeah.
very true. You can see just very small example how the DAC criteria, OECD DAC criteria, has been used significantly in global south evaluation, and it is very limited in so many ways. It puts the whole evaluation in a box, and most evaluations are done this way against this criteria. And you have big organization. Evaluation is very much driven by demand. Who demands the evaluation? And so it is really restricted to that. I think as a field, it is an ocean rather than a sea. But how it is in practice, sometimes it feels like a lake or a small swimming pool behind your your house or something like this. So it has a lot of potential. Yet, I think we only using a fraction of what evaluation field. You know, for example, this is Michael Scriven highlights this very well long time ago, where he talks about evaluation as a transdiscipline or even alpha discipline, he calls it at some point, where we restrict our thinking about evaluation always as a program evaluation. Evaluation is not only about the program evaluation. There's a product evaluation, personal evaluation, anything that involves this function, the higher function of human thinking, which is related to evaluating something, evaluating which shirt I have to wear today is evaluation in a way. So it's that, as much as I think evaluation, as much as you try to understand it and use it, it can be very flexible. But within this international aid system, then it is very restricted and has so small boundaries, I feel.
So is it because there are many variables that come into play? You mentioned that it's demand driven. So I'm assuming it's usually, from my experience, it's driven by whoever funds the project, right? They want to see if their monies were achieved whatever goal they were intended to achieve.
Yeah.
So in what way, or rather the question is like, have you been engaged in, or have you heard of changes within that donor commissioning, those who commission evaluation essentially, any shifts because they're noticing the limitations of evaluations, that the evaluations with those very restricting or restricting criteria are not actually yielding results or knowledge or data or information that really serves to improve. They serve to prove, maybe at best, but not really to improve and to see which activities, which programs, which projects, which intervention initiatives are, where's the good in that, and why did it work in that context, to be able to see whether it's even replicable in another context. So I'm thinking, is there a shift within the donor community as well? And I'm using donor very wide. That's philanthropy and bilateral, multilateral donors.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a very good question. Could I'm just thinking while you're asking the question. how the whole evaluation field has started. It started from the educational assessment, mostly in the US. And that was so much driven by accountability and by demand. The government in the US then had huge programs that they needed to know, is it worthwhile the money we're spending on this? So the evaluation field kind of emerged, or program evaluation field has emerged in this way. And then it was really picked up by the donors, especially when they spend money in the global south, then called even third world countries, where they wanted to make sure that this foreign aid, with all its purposes, which one of the main, I have done my master thesis about the determinants and motives behind foreign aid. And we know that a lot of foreign aid is for good, but also a lot of for it is it's a foreign policy tool. It's well established even that is a foreign policy tool. And so donors wanted, donor agencies now in this sense, let's start even before philanthropy, before other NGOs and so on, they wanted to explain to their population that this money is worthwhile, it's achieving some progress in these countries, which will also help us somehow. And so the demand was for this, the accountability part. Yet it happens that in these organizations and also in the global south and in the whole community, there are people who really care about learning as well, not only accountability. That's why you see a lot of the field, when you do evaluation, it's never completely just accountability check mark, but it's also never as, oh wow, we imagine it to be amazing learning experience and so on. It's the truth is in between, I feel. I'm not of the extreme say, oh, all evaluations are done as a checkbox and are useless. And I'm not also saying that all of them are done. This needs research, this needs work, and big statement about how evaluation all don't work. I find them not very true from my experience. I have worked in my home country of Palestine, but also in our region of the Middle East and North Africa, as well as in Europe. And I have worked with so many different programs and people. Actually, most of my career, I worked as external evaluator rather than internal planning, monitoring, and evaluation expert, which I am doing now and I have done in the beginning of my career. And I saw how actually on the human level, there's so much done on the accountability, but also the learning, the exchange on monitoring and evaluation. The first project I started with was a US aid project implemented by an organization in Palestine called Amid East, and where first project was called Model Schools Network, and the second one was Leadership and Teacher Development Program. And I had colleagues there who were really, really interested in measuring, understanding impact and outcomes, and also being useful to rights holders, so children and students. And I remember doing great things then in terms of like learning, in terms of sharing with Ministry of Education. I have then established the Palestinian Evaluation Association actually in 2013, and it was most of its first members were from the Ministry of Education and other ministries where I started working with them through this project in the beginning. And until now, this community is well alive and people working together and exchanging and so on. So I feel there's so much happening, yet the overall framework of why it is happening, it is linked to foreign aid. And a lot of foreign aid has also, I'm not, cynical person, but I know that foreign aid's goals and objectives are not always to help people in the global south. It also has its foreign policy instruments. And so this is also the evaluation, limitation. I feel that it is within this. If we see evaluation as separate thing from all the context around it, I think it's not fair to evaluation or to the work evaluators do.
Yeah, I think it's also I've heard in talking to different evaluators. There's there's this little tension between practitioners of evaluation and the theoretical wars, if I may say so, theoretical battles that are going on about what approach of evaluation is the best for this context, etc. And actually, in conferences, I do feel it, right? These kind of, this one is better, this one is more appropriate, this one, and I think that's why we're not. Maybe doing a good job at showcasing some of the usefulness of evaluation, not only as an end product, but also as a catalyst for processes, for improving processes of implementation of different programmings. But I hear you, and as I was hearing you, there were two things that came to mind. The first one is that you've worked recently, and we're seeing it more and more, about the shift that's happening, or more awareness to this tension, the biases of international aid, international development, the way it's actually it functions, right? So commissioned usually from the North, funded by the countries in the global North. I think now I was going to talk about language because semantics are important, right? In this conversation as well, people talk about is it the minority? So the global minority or and majority. So anyway, so funded from the North, commissioned by the North to address the interests of the North, be they socioeconomic, be they political, geostrategic, as we know. So so my question is about the new trend, or the new conversations that are happening now on what it means to decolonize evaluation. And I know you've worked on that a little bit, coming at it maybe from a justice and equity perspective as well is a way of grounding it for you. But I wanted you to speak to me a little bit about that, about what it means. What does decolonizing evaluation actually means in practice? With maybe comconcrete example of when you do an evaluation, what are you looking for to ensure that it's respectful of the communities, the countries where you're doing them?
So just want to speak a little bit to the point, very important point you mentioned about the tension sometimes between academics and practitioners in evaluation, or even practitioners using different tools and approaches. And I feel there's a lot of this territorial thinking, maybe it's a lot of it motivated by being a human being with people, even if you hear on the radio or on TV or a newspaper some piece of a news, you start to really believe that and advocate for it and everything. Although you just hear it on the news, it's not your opinion. Sometimes we tend to do like this as human beings. Our knowledge system, our what we know and so on, we are territorial sometimes about what we learn first. And if I specialize in certain approach in evaluation, I start to advocate for it. There was so much debate in the 80s, in the 70s, I think, as well, in the evaluation field between qualitative and quantitative, and nobody now talks about it almost, because every evaluation, and I have been also doing meta evaluations for big organizations, and I see a lot of evaluation. Every evaluation says we will do mixed evaluation, mixed methods evaluation, and even in research now also it's similar way. And yeah, I feel that's something we can do about, and there's also limitation to that. But it is, I also notice it, and myself, I try to, as an individual, between academia and practice, doing evaluation research, but also doing evaluations, being engaged in circles here and there, being also involved in different evaluation approaches. And I know so many people, and I want to link this to the youth in evaluation movement because I feel there's a change now with youth in evaluation, something that I also, worked on. We have established the Evaluator global network,
I remember.
and work with so many young and emerging evaluators, and we started have these debates and conversation and sharing with people, bringing people from different fields, from within the evaluation, from different methodologies. And I feel I even once we spoke a little bit before about the American Evaluation Association before we started the podcast, and you asked, I participated actually in 2019, and I give a keynote speech, and it was actually, I remember saying something, can't remember exactly what I said in that speech, but something about youth being not dogmatic to one school of thought in evaluation or one, but they are practical and they are fighting for issues like social justice, equity, climate justice, rather than being territorial about this tool or another. So this gives me hope that youth are, or majority of people I work with from that segment of the evaluation community is concerned more with justice issues and important issues rather than being territorial about a tool here and there. And this also linked to the main questions you ask about decolonizing evaluation, localization. Now we hear it a lot everywhere sometimes, and also the and indigenization of evaluation. And for me, it's quite simple, really. I mean, sometimes it gets so complicated and so many papers are written about it, and which is good because that's how you improve in a field. But for me, it started with me being as a Palestinian evaluator, local evaluator, where the first time I received a mandate to work on an evaluation with a hotshot evaluator who came from abroad, and he assumed that as a local evaluator I will be kind of his secretary. And I had to stand up. It was one of the very early evaluations I did. I was young, but I was trained in evaluation, and I believed that local knowledge is as important as scientific knowledge, that Palestine's situation is not like the other country he was working on similar evaluation and didn't even read the literature that in that evaluation about. And I stood up and said, no, this is how we do things here. I am not your secretary. I'm also an evaluator on this evaluation.
Yeah.
Exactly. Then when we speak with people, local community, what language we use, and then respecting social norms. Are you going to insist on your values, saying I will have the focus group discussions this way because the teacher says this way, or you're going to understand what is the local community boundaries around that, or just throw your judgment saying, oh, they don't understand, or they're not understanding what is the global trends in this, or there's so many things. So actually this is something that I also very passionate about, write about, work with people about. As part of some training I give about equity and social justice and decolonizing evaluation. Yes, you can take it to the epistemological arguments about how we achieve reach knowledge, and but you can also speak with people when evaluators with you speak with them. It's about how you do evaluations. Are you considering local knowledge, local traditions, or are you only thinking about this agreed upon global tools and frameworks that don't apply? Are you challenging those or not? So that is also, I think, something that we could do much better in evaluation. But it's also rooted in something so much bigger, that who produces knowledge in evaluation? Who write books? Who write journal articles? Who invests time and resources in these things? Who can maybe? So there's also so many deep rooted reasons and rationales for that. Some people say, oh, we should just decolonize evaluation and this how to do it 1, 2, 3, 4, and they ignore that this has a lot of history about who writes for us. Do we read as evaluators from the global south or global north? Are we always reading to the same guy and referencing the same guy, looking up to this person or that, and not looking at the amazing wisdom around us? and working with fellow evaluators from different areas, global south or north, but also valuing the knowledge of people from different perspectives. Or
Yeah,
we have this, what is called in some field, the wide gaze, they call it. Basically, that you're always thinking about specific segments of the international community in your mind in everything you do. So there's so much to this,
true.
and it's there is a lot of interest within the evaluation field
Mm.
about it, and there's also a little bit of turnout. I feel because there's so many people writing about decolonizing this and that, decolonizing, but people don't see what exactly you're talking about. So the other day I give a training with my actually university where I did my master's in Belgium in Antwerp. They do capacity building training for um, global South evaluation associations, and I did. It was two parts. One was training about equity and social justice, where we discussed decolonization
Yeah.
and indigenization, but also we did a debate after. And I it was one of the really nice moments is when some of the participants reach out to me on LinkedIn, or even actually that time they wrote to me directly and or spoke directly and say, look, we always read decolonize and actually we don't want to read it because they're complicated, and but you have shared with us in very practical examples about what we can do when we leave.
Mm.
And some some of the participants over the years I've been teaching this course, or going participating 2 3 years, and sometimes people are very skeptical, from the why do we have to decolonize? If
Mm.
there are tools that are well proven and they are good, why do we have to decolonize? Some people have this.
Yeah.
So it's not about only rejecting everything, but it's about rejecting or amending something when it really doesn't apply to your community.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just show it with the example of average.
Mm.
The whole concept of average is so unfair, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
you say the average of population said, and scientifically this is very well accepted and everything. And average is the enemy of equity, I feel, because there are so many different aspects. Or when you discuss intersectionality, maybe it's yes, some of the concept developed in the global north. That's fine, but how it is serving equity and social justice within different communities or not.
Yeah.
So that's very important to me.
Yeah. So, Khalil, a lot of things to unpack in here, and I don't know if
Yes.
we're going to be able to unpack everything. But the first point that came to mind is two things, and it brings us back to the criteria and maybe some of the tension that exists between theory and practice. One of them is criteria are there to ensure robustness, methodologies are there to ensure robustness of findings, right? So we want to make sure that we're actually gathering data and making analyses that actually can represent the reality on the ground. But we know that those are flawed, right? To some extent, they're limiting. Um, but at the same time, I'm thinking that, regardless of whether you talk about decolonization, well, first, I come from a country that was colonized, right? I know what colonization is. It was part, yeah, exactly. It was part of actually our family heritage discussions. So, I know that, even if people see me and don't think that I am, but I can see that without having to, like, we had those conversations many, many years ago in our work with people that were like me, who also came from developing countries, and usually at the time that were colonized. So it's not new conversations, but it's now there seems to be a democratization of speech through maybe internet and shared information and media. So people are starting to speak, and people are starting to get their voices heard, which weren't heard before. Everyone couldn't go to a big evaluation conference, right? So very few people could at the time, maybe now a little bit more, but still the language, as you said, people spoke to each other in those circles
Mm.
along the same line. There wasn't much disruption, much new ideas to challenge those. So right now we're talking about it, and as you say, there's a lot written about it. Maybe we talk about it, and it's going to be as theoretical as the rest in a few years' time. When those people who work in NGOs in the South, in the global South, come to you for training, what are the key takeaways, like, that you leave them with, that they can apply when they go back? Is it new ways of doing things, or how they speak about things, or is it just their perception and attitude towards it? What is it that you leave them with, essentially?
Yeah, for me, really, it's all above, right? You cannot just work on one aspect. Let's take the example you mentioned about the criteria. I think the point you said about criteria and methodology, for example, criteria is for robustness and method is for robustness of findings. That's what you said. I agree. But for me, criteria is all about measuring what matters, evaluating what matters. So it's not technically for robustness in my mind, but it's about what do you put on the spotlight for this evaluation. So back to OECD, their criteria, widely used. It's the lingua franca of evaluation in the global South in so many different ways. Yet it doesn't have a criterion about equity. So with the people I work with, and I learn from them as much as I teach about this aspect, because every time there's really a lot of sharing from them and them discussing things and them reaching conclusions, is that DEC says, or OECD DEC, you don't need criterion for equity because this could be covered within this coherence criterions that we had. And actually, it's not. If you do analysis, and there's so many scholars that have written about this as well, and also practitioners that have written about it. So we take this example and say what to do then. Is it because they face reality when they go back? You can't tell them reject this OECD criteria and then they say, okay, next evaluation when I come, that UR says you have to evaluate. No, not based on this criteria. So I work with them from examples I have worked where it's actually true, where I had to negotiate the criteria and say, look, you have this criteria, OECD criteria, it's very important. What about intersectional criteria, for example? You also about have gender, but did you consider also the environment one? Can we do something about equity in this aspect? And believe it or not, this can work. It can work in many different contexts. So we work around these things. So we don't do something so, although half of the training I do is theoretical and half is also practical, because I have developed a tool called SEAT, Social Equity Assessment Tool, where I actually train them using this SEAT tool, which considers 13 demographic equity aspects as well as other aspects for environmental, but also, for example, what about the evaluation team? I will share the link with you as well about this
I'd love to.
SEAT tool.
Yeah.
And so we discuss practical, the same course or in different version of it, I do with a global firm that has a learning center, ELC, with Encompass. And a lot of actually the participants are from the US. And most of the time, program managers or evaluators, monitoring and evaluation practitioners. And then we work with them, and the reality is a little bit different. But they also, within their country, have so many different problems. So I feel it's a class issue. It's justice issue rather than just decolonizing, as there are decolonizers there in the north and there's decolonized in the south. It's not very true. Within each country, there is colonizers and people need decolonization. It is everywhere. So that's why I always, the standpoint for me is about the equity and social justice. And something you said that struck me when you said, oh, now it's more open that people can travel to conferences. And yes, it's very true. I'm very quite worried now. I feel that it's ups and down. And a few years ago, that was very, for example, DEI now, the whole diversity, equity, and inclusion,
Mhm.
almost becoming a dirty word in the US with everything that is happening. So how much we go one step forward, two step backward. There's yes a
Mhm.
freedom to certain level, but then even when you make a progress in certain areas, some people also take it to the extreme and start to kind of use the cause and empty it from what it's really the object
Mm.
for, and then you have people revolting against this. They say, oh, okay, it's too much now. I'm concerned that actually, yes, although you rightly said that this has been now a topic that is more important, and there's a little bit democratization, as you put it. I agree, but I'm also concerned because I see that some say, okay, decolonizing everywhere and equity, we talk about equity too much. Or at some point, I dared to start writing about a track that really was not in the evaluation field before, in this way at least. Evaluators as activists. I wrote a
Mm.
couple of blogs about this. I started even every training I do, I always show evaluators a few heads and
Mm.
say, there's the different heads of evaluation. Actually, one of the participants of your podcast before, Ali Khatib, who's a friend of mine, who helped me actually do this design, which is really nice, the different heads. And from literature, there's evaluators or evaluation scholars who think evaluators are like judges. Others, they think that they're social scientists. Others, they think they're facilitators. And I always say activists. And to many evaluators, just saying the word activist is very, very sensitive thing, because they don't want to think of themselves as activists. And this is a concept we explore. I'm not saying that evaluator should be active. I have so much nuance to this, but I always use it in my training to challenge this idea about what is our role in eval. Are we passive participants where we come and we say we are, this is right, this is wrong, this is done correctly, and this is the evidence, and value neutral, or it is actually much more complicated than this. We are part of this evaluation because we are working for our community. A lot of evaluators are working not for donor agencies. They're working on evaluations in their small communities, or working on small project in this school or that. And this is very relevant to them. So it's important
Yeah.
not to think about evaluation as one aspect and that's it.
Absolutely, yeah. I remember actually when I did evaluations, what I that people would tell me that the process of evaluation actually got them to think differently about what they did.
Yeah.
So there is value. So in that sense, it's the evaluator who's also a catalyst, a facilitator, a coach, if you will, into improving an understanding, or just like yeah, seeing things differently on the perspective. I've got the cards, but I haven't shared them with you now, and we are 30 minutes in. A couple of things. The first one I read recently, and I think it touches on what you said, especially about the OCDDAC criteria and this kind of methodology, this focus on methodology, etc. It's the fact that we've focused so much on process, on the right process, and forgot to ask the questions. So about what are the right questions that we need to ask? What is it that we want to understand? And I think you did touch on it in the first place. Is when you, and that was one of your recommendations to those trainees, is when you go back, don't take it at face value. The terms of reference are an initial guidance, but you have to propose a methodology that you think is sound for that environment. So have that conversation. And I think the way that we will change things is to have more and more of these conversations, not just as at the design of the methodology and evaluation methodology, but also throughout implementation, before a project, because the evaluation or the findings or the outcomes, the change outcomes, are going to be as good as you've designed the project in the first place. Were
Yeah.
you asking yourself the right questions when you designed the project? Because that's when you determine your indicators for success, etc. So I think it's a real seeing it from a holistic perspective, from a full cycle perspective, rather than a kind of a a stop, like at a moment in time that you do that change. And so let me tell you a little bit about the cards and see if which one I'll tell you, because it's so the first one is process. That's why I asked the question process.
Good.
So that was process. Then we have strength and capacity. You've talked about that with the trainings you do, both as on the theory and practice, which is good. I'd like you to talk to me a little bit more about this for youth and the participatory youth in evaluation agenda. I was looking at obstacles, and you did speak a little bit about that, but maybe if you have any more that come to, and maybe the obstacles are not always, sometimes it's a way of perceiving things, right? Of your the lens you wear and the way you see things is and the last one is the historical context, and you did go back to the history of evaluation, where it started and why it had evolved the way it did, because of its early days, right? So let's talk about, I don't know what you want to talk about, strength and capacity, processes, and some of the obstacles to young evaluators, for example.
You spoke about just before you showed the card about the processes, and I was thinking about that. I feel from my experience, from my work, it's actually quite the opposite. I have my experience, at least, that we focus too much on the outcomes and impact and the end results of things rather than the processes. There's so much.
So you
focus
mean processes of the programming processes?
Yeah, but not only. I'll tell you, always there's this obsession almost with this results management by results, and always what is the result we want to achieve. This is something actually I've been using since I was starting in the field, whether as an evaluator, as a practitioner, or even as a researcher, or in the focus track on working with different organizations. Always I am very interested in processes. I think they're so important, and we don't focus enough on processes, because we always think about if you achieve. This is the theory of change of this whole development aid, but not only, right? Is that if you reach certain result, means that you did correctly all the way along to reach this result. So don't measure the way, measure if you arrive there or not. And there's a lot of truth to this. But at the same time, we miss so much by not evaluating, or not focusing, or not teaching about, and not working about how we get there. Because sometimes, yes, but the journey is the reward, learning from where you arrive. If you want, the lazy approach in my view is to say, oh, what is the outcome, what is the impact? And most of the time they don't even want what is the outcome or outputs, they want what is the impact,
whatever that means.
Which
whatever
exactly,
the word.
whatever that means. If it ever happens for a small project with 300,000 and wanted to change the world, so this is about the processes. Just to say that I am very interested in processes, not to be lost in the processes, because you can, but to never ignore them and enjoy the processes and learn about it and teach about, again, live this, not only thinking about the results.
Yeah. No, my point was mostly on evaluation process. The actual evaluation process, where we focus so much on process. You have to do this because that's the methodology that you've chosen and the approach. You have to do this and that and that. And we forget to actually sit back and say, okay, what are the questions we're trying to answer?
True. Yeah, true.
And
that's very true. I have, just to say very quickly, I have something called, it's very, very primary work. I have not developed so much, but something, I played on the word of theory, theory of change. I made something called theory of evaluation. And it's 37 steps, I think, of the different evaluation processes to consider. And in these processes, again, I can share the link with you.
Please do. Yeah, I'm taking notes so I don't forget.
Yeah, I especially made it for practitioners. It's a tool for practitioners and also young people who are joining the field. And it says, but for example, part of it also how to consider decolonization, how to consider equity and social justice, but also how to
design the evaluation, and there's like metrics to that, how, step 2, 3, 4, 5, or also how to evaluate it. So I agree with you on this. If you mean about the process of, if we focus too much on the process of evaluation, there's so much time spent on that. And then we what are we really evaluating? In ideally, most of the evaluation should be thinking about the criteria, because it's the tough one, right? And now we have this lazy approach of adopting certain criteria that somebody has written and say, okay, we apply it, we just change the questions. And so many TORs, you see the criteria for impact or the criteria for efficiency, or it's just one word changed, from one evaluation to another, where actually the real work should be, what is the criteria that's important for this particular evaluation I want to do, and spend a lot of time thinking about what you want to evaluate beside how you want to evaluate.
Yeah. So, Khalil, talk to me a little bit about youth participation, Evaluate, and then you also, I think, there's another network, Eval for Action.
Yes. So
tell me about that. Why was it needed? Why was it important to bring people together? To what end? And what results have you achieved out of that community of practice, so to speak?
Exactly. Evaluate was established in 2015. I was part of the group that was in this global event called Global Evaluation Forum, which was really an important event in 2015 in Nepal. Not the first and not the last Global Evaluation Forum, but this is was organized by Eval Partners and IUCE, the International Organization for Cooperation in Evaluations, which recently now I was elected to be the president of IUCE and co-chair of Eval Partners. Before I started as a youth with Eval Youth. So thank you. And we started with Eval Youth, and then we had really amazing two co-chairs who started also the process. And the idea was, we have 23 young and emerging evaluators from different regions. They say, what is our priorities? What we want to do? And we voted and worked together and did 3 task force and continued that. And then I, quickly after that became the vice chair of it and worked with the two co-chairs for 5 years, from being vice chair and then chair. And Eval Youth was the first global network for young and emerging evaluators. There were so many young and emerging evaluators who wanted to build their capacity in evaluation, but also wanted to contribute to the evaluation field. Then even a lot of VOBIs, evaluation associations, were known to, and there's even jokes about, or people making fun, it's a PhD guy who is 70 years or 65 years plus, who is the president of certain evaluation association, and in the board there are people who are there for 10 years and no young people. And so Eval Youth really was working on this, empowering young and emerging evaluators. Then we even said especially young female evaluators, because then actually it was harder for them. Anyways, to cut story long story short, now after 10 years, or about 10 years, Eval Youth is going to celebrate next year the 10-year anniversary. It's a global network with huge reach. I think at some point it was 5,000 young and emerging evaluators being part of its activities, organize a global mentorship program, international conference, annual conference, so many activities, but supporting so many young and emerging evaluators who became leaders. I mentioned even about myself, now I was, remember, a small volunteer in this network in the beginning, and now I lead the organization that started this whole thing. But there's so many fellow young and emerging evaluators then who became now heads of the African Evaluation Association. Actually, is headed by one. The Asian APIA, the vice chair. So many, the European Evaluation Association, American Evaluation, everywhere. So this was youth movement in evaluation, but not only about advocating for young and emerging evaluators, but advocating for the issues young and emerging evaluators care about as well. Social justice, equity, climate, all the issues that are very important to young people, youth in general, and building connection with others in the field, in the outside field, in people working on different areas, but youth with UN agencies and so on. Something that I'm very passionate about. Eval Youth is still thriving and doing very well, has served a lot the community, and now young and emerging evaluators are serving the community in a meaningful way. So
that's fantastic. Wow, congratulations. I remember when you started it, I was in Senegal at the time, so it was a big thing because Senegal at the time wanted to do something similar, support young and emerging evaluators. So it was that big wave, right? But also it was at the time that there were actually, it was the tail end of new programs in evaluation, because when I studied at university, there was no master's in evaluation. I came in through social anthropology, and that's how you made it to that field. So it was also because you were seeing a new cohort of students who were graduating from programs that had either a course on evaluation or a full-fledged evaluation program in 2015. So that was really good. I'm just very conscious of time, so I just want a few words about Eval for Action. How is that different, and which action?
Exactly. Eval for Action, it has been, but it was established in 2020. It was a partnership between UNFPA Evaluation Office, Independent Evaluation Office, Eval Youth, and the Global Parliamentarian Forum. And the idea behind it was to promote and foster action for promoting evaluation, but also promoting the achievements of the SDGs 2030.
Okay.
How can evaluation be relevant? How can evaluation support that? So I participated in establishing it as part, being a co-chair of or chair then of Eval Youth. Yes, and something that is really doing great work now. It's an advocacy campaign basically for evaluation, for SDGs and beyond as well. And so they have regional consultations in most regions. They focus a lot on the meaningful engagement of young and emerging evaluators. UNFPA is really leading in that. Amazing. They have, with the Eval for Action, developed something called the Youth Manifesto, and also the Youth Inclusion and Evaluation Standards, which a lot of organizations now adopting. So they're doing a lot of work on that. But it is Eval for Action, that evaluation is really contribution to action, not just to words and
right,
so on.
Right. And the network members, Khalil, are a few UN. I'm assuming UN agencies apart from UNFPA and civil society, NGOs.
Eval for Action has UNFPA as co-leader, but members and partners, I think now they're about one. Last time I checked, maybe 1 year ago was 125. Maybe now it's so much more. But UN agencies, NGOs, VOBIs, evaluation associations, and so many others. Eval Partners is a partnership between evaluation associations that is represented by OCE and UN agencies. So that is a different structure. There are now, and I hear from few colleagues, because part of the trainings I give sometimes also about the governance of evaluation and international evaluation structures and how they're helpful for regional and national VOBIs. Right now, it's a little bit confusing for so many people.
It is. There's
so many global structures and a global network. 10 years ago or 15 years ago, it was really, we knew there's IUCE and Eval Partners. People know that, and the P2P projects and all of that. But now there's so many. Same, like we said, you said, as you said, when you went to do your master's, there was maybe no courses in evaluation for master.
For that,
Especially perhaps
long time ago.
Yeah, but no, but even when I did mine was 15 or a little bit less than that. Also, there was one main program in Europe that I was aware of. At least now maybe then there was two I didn't know, but now there are much more. Of course, the US has so much more because evaluation field in the US is much more developed in terms of teaching and learning. To be honest, that's what I feel. But until now, for example, in the Arab world, it's not really good. It's very difficult to find a course in master program in evaluation. In so many different regions as well, it's not very easy to find. So you have to go and study abroad in order to have program. But still, there's much more than before. And sometimes, because I'm very well connected to young and emerging evaluators, always asking me and sharing about my experience. And they say there's so many programs. What can we select from? I mean, at least in Europe and the US. And I start to try to help with my experiences. Say this one I know this person went to and said it's good. You can connect with it.
Right.
But more options, definitely much more than 10 years ago, 15 years ago, or more.
Yeah, it's a full-fledged sector now, right? With academic program and actually pathways as well. Even if you're just doing evaluation, there is a pathway, right? If you're an emerging evaluator, you start with your first evaluation, and then you can go with the much larger groups, group evaluation and teams to do much larger projects. Sure. Khalil, it was just lovely to have this conversation with you. I'm glad we finally made it. Thank you for sharing your insights and your experience.
It's my pleasure.
Learned.
Sorry not to have covered all these cards, and maybe I answered for a long time.
You covered them as we were talking. I drew them, but then I left them on the table, and then when I looked back, I was like, oh, but he actually addressed many of them. So that's perfect. Good. That's fine. Maybe now you can develop the first evaluation program in an Arab university.
There's some efforts here and there. There are some efforts here and there. I hope it will happen. I'm not actively working on it, but this is interesting. And or you can also, there's potentially the Valmina conference. I have never met you in the Valmina conference. This one I attend every year or every other year.
Where is it happening?
Next time it's going to happen in Doha, Qatar. They were talking about January, end of January, but now it's not, I think, going to happen end of January. Maybe sometime in the beginning of next year, April or May. And the first time in the Gulf country, because the idea is to also have the evaluation culture and evaluation association going there. So it would be great if you like to attend that too.
I'll look into it. Thanks for the heads up. Thank you so much, Khalil. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure.
Talk to you
Thank
soon.
you.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of Rethink Social Change podcast. I hope you got a lot of value and actionable insights from today's show. Would love if you take a minute to leave us a review. And if you work on social change and are up for the challenge, reach out. And before you go, be sure to subscribe so you're the first to know when we release a new episode. Till then, be the change.